Asha, good to have you with us on the programme tonight. I mean, the carnage that we've seen in the last few days, over $5 trillion wiped off the global economy in a matter of days. It was, I suppose, fairly predictable that this would happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody from any political spectrum, whether you're a neoclassical economist, Keynesian, Marxian, institutionalist, nobody I know who or even read about would say that this wasn't the direction of travel, other than people, like, say, within the Trump administration. It was very clear that if the U.S. simply, even in the short and medium term, couldn't make up the difference, it'd be retaliatory tariffs. And that you'd see confidence in the market plummet. We'll see. We haven't seen full-scale inflationary problems. We haven't seen the problem with falling asset prices. But, a lot of this was very clear that this was the direction of travel.
And Donald Trump sort of talking about this, saying, I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. And we have been treated so badly by other countries because we had stupid leadership that allowed this to happen. So he's basically saying short-term pain for long-term gain, that it will be worth it in the long run. Will it?
Well, look, I think the idea that trade deficits didn't work for America is just not true. I think most countries, it doesn't work for them. The drivers of globalization, really, if you look at Bretton Woods, you see the fall of the dollar reserve, the global reserve currency in the 1970s becoming the dollar, the fall of the bamboo curtain, the fall of the iron curtain, all of this stuff, and globalization's real driver, the WTO being formed in America, the IMF being crystallized in America, all of that was driven by America. They weren't worried about trade deficits because they were the global reserve currency. Everything was traded with dollars, which means they could borrow to the hilt and every country was paying for it. So the idea that trade deficits didn't work for America is just not true. It's not borne out in the evidence. Maybe now it's not working. I mean, it worked for American corporations. It didn't necessarily work for American workers because their jobs went abroad. But American workers then had access to cheap debt. That's why their debt
and cheap
mushroomed.
Goods, yeah.
Precisely because the Americans could use the dollar as a reserve currency. Everybody wanted dollars. And so now the idea that somehow the medium pain, long-term pain, there's a lot of evidence that they're trying to reassert dollar supremacy, because you look at like Latin America, China, Iran, parts of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, trying to move away from the petrodollar. There's a lot of evidence in Russia as well. But it's not clear that that's the case, because if you look at Iran, they're at 10% tariffs. You look at Israel, they're at 17%.
Yeah.
You look at, so it's not very clear. They're clearly just looking at the deficit and splitting it in half and putting it at that. They're not using it as a kind of political cudgel to get what they want from other countries.
So where does this go next, Ashok? Because are markets going to continue to just go through the floor? Where does this end?
Well, really, it's hard to predict with Trump. I mean, Trump is sort of an erratic character. He always opposed tariffs, even when he was, supporter of the Green Party in the 90s. Even in the early 2000s, he was always a supporter of tariffs. He thought that, that free trade. He was quite critical of free trade, especially when, the height of when it was happening. And so this is a kind of ideological position that he has. It's something that's deeply popular with the base of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, for that matter, and trade unions, et cetera, especially in the sort of the heart of America, the sort of the Midwest and those purple states, et cetera. So there's a political dimension to this, but there's also the fact that we just simply don't know which way he's going to go. He's so committed. He's really sort of like, anchored his politics and his political sort of legacy to this. And so if he just flips the script very, very quickly and abandons it, it will be basically almost like a lame duck for the next 3 years.
And he's insisting he absolutely won't do that. There were some rumours today that led to a sort of stabilisation in the markets, that he was about to pause these tariffs. Not so. He's doubling down, insisting he won't do that. And in fact, Ashok, threatening China with even more import taxes. He says he might increase the tariffs he's placed on China to more than 100%. I mean, what is the impact of this sort of escalating trade war between the world's two biggest economies and two sort of superpowers, really, going to be?
Well, look, the percentage that they said that the Chinese had done was 4 times the percentage many independent analysts are saying. They said they used some AI and they said that it was. So then China increased their tariffs, and Trump says, if you don't reduce your tariffs, China, we're gonna increase it to 104% by Wednesday.
It keeps mounting
so if
up.
it increases to 104%, we have to understand the lay of the land. China has diversified their trade. They're the number one trading partner of 54 countries. They are not relying on the U.S. Yes, they'd take a big hit, but they could survive that. The U.S. simply could not survive Well, they could survive, but they would be severely undermined
Right. So
by
this
introducing
trade
100.
war harms America and American people much
It
more than
would
it
cut.
harms China and Chinese people.
Yes, and
Yeah.
it would collapse U.S.-Chinese trade relations entirely. By the end of the week, we could see a complete shift that happened when Nixon and Kissinger arrived in the mid '70s in China. That trade agreement that really helped control American falling asset prices and runaway inflation in the 1970s after the crisis in 1973. You're gonna see a potential huge shift, a tectonic shift you haven't seen in a half century.
I think one of the really interesting sort of potential unknowns in all this is the fact that a lot of people around Trump who support Trump, who have funded Trump, who have endorsed Trump, very wealthy American businessmen, this is something that is going to trouble them significantly because, of course, they're losing billions of dollars potentially. And it seems Ashok already is. Headline on CNN tonight, Billionaires are turning on Donald Trump. Quotes one prominent Trump supporter, billionaire hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, who endorsed Trump last year, warning that what the US president is now doing amounts to an economic nuclear war. He says business investment will grind to a halt, consumers will close their wallets, we will severely damage our reputation with the rest of the world. And potentially in a way that will take decades to rehabilitate. I mean, Trump doesn't listen to many people and doesn't care what many people think. But these people, the likes of Bill Ackman, are people he has to pay attention to, aren't they?
Well, look, I think that it's very clear that there now is a lot of the billionaire class of people have come out and are opposing it. I don't know. I think it's just very hard to predict. He's just very hard to predict. Usually, he doesn't play by the normal political playbook. You can very much see poll numbers go a certain way, donors go a certain way, and you can predict how a politician is going to move. That's what a lifelong politician does. It's very predictable. You don't want to put pressure on them. With Trump, it's impossible to say. It's impossible to say.
If I asked you to predict, though, finally, sort of whether he backs down or whether the carnage goes on and on, Ashok, I mean, I appreciate it's hard to know, but what's your instinct on it?
I think the carnage continues because if he gives in now, it's 3 years of a lame duck where he can't get anything elected. The logic and legacy of Trump has been pierced. And, if you're talking about stabilization and he wants stability, he's like, okay, this is the way we're going to go. This is the new normal. If he capitulates and concedes, that's a new kind of layer of instability. So he's saying this is the new normal. If these tariffs are established and we're going to allow for people to invest in the country, and if it makes sense for you to invest in the country and build America or whatever, if he capitulates and makes the tariffs go away immediately, that's further a layer of instability and less investment. It gives people less confidence to invest. So I just don't see him doing it.
Really interesting. Ashok, thank you very much. Ashok Kumar, lecturer in international political economy at Birkbeck University.